And hello, everybody. Everybody in the chat, everybody else watching. And tonight, the second part of Dune, Muad'dib, and a little bit a different panel. So one extra panelist tonight, Carl Albert. Hello, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Super excited to be here.
Okay, great. And we have the other four from last week. Jared, how are you?
Good. Thank you.
Good. Philip, hi.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I guess I didn't mess up too badly last time.
Not too, no, I don't think so. And hi, Vasha, how are you?
Hey, Angela and everyone else. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And Matt, how are you, Matt?
Pretty good. I got my other Dune T-shirt on this time.
Oh, you show off.
I'm totally prepared. I've even got a third one for next
Other
time.
Dune T-shirt.
I've got another one. I've got one more.
I thought you got three.
Yeah, at least. I've got an Atreides T-shirt as well with the Atreides crest on it. So,
I do too.
And we actually have people in the chat as well.
Carl's gonna get
I can't let him be the only one. I can't believe I didn't put it on. But I got this is actually a recent buy.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I think you're being one-upped there a little bit, Matt.
Yeah.
Wait until you see my Atreides T-shirt.
That's what happens when you invite screenwriters. I will reconsider my decisions.
It was a recent buy. I was sad. I was like, Dune is one of my favorite books, favorite book series, and I love the first part of Denis' take on it. And I was like, I need to get a T-shirt. Like, I gotta rep it. I wear enough graphic tees that, well, finally came through.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So tonight, part 2, basically from crashing in the desert to taking the water of life, which is the big ending of this. Any outstanding things, themes, scenes you would like to talk about?
Well, I'm going to jump in because it's been more than 3 years since I read it, and I have a very dodgy memory. But one scene that does stand out to me, I mentioned before we started the stream, is the fight with Jamis, and what that means for Paul, who's been seeing these visions, these prophecies, if you will, and he's seen Jamis. And he's supposed to be a great friend. He's supposed to be a figure. He has good feelings, but when he actually meets him in person, it's as an antagonist, and he has to. It's his first time ever killing someone, so it's really quite a standout scene for me. And I really love the way Herbert makes this thing so ambiguous. Like, okay, does this mean Paul's visions, his prophecies are all, suspect because it pans out this way? Or can we reinterpret these visions in the context of Jamis being Paul's first very dramatic introduction to the Fremen culture? He takes his water, he becomes part of him in a sense.
He inherits his wife.
Yeah.
And children.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so,
that as well. Yeah.
What a scene. So I'd love to hear what you all think of that scene.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Like, especially what you said about the visions. I have this actually in my notes as one of the points we probably need to address, because there is this other scene when they meet the Fremen first, and he meets Jamis first, and basically takes him out, and gets his weapon. That Paul reflects on this whole encounter and says, this is not how I saw this in my vision, because in his vision, I think Duncan Idaho was there and he's not with him. No? So the visions are kind of like called into question right from the start of the second part. And I think also it's a nice build up and foreshadowing into then that scene where he actually really kills Jamis.
Yeah. So that's a theme that runs through it is the validity of prophecy and
and there's a bit. I'm not sure it's in the second part of the book or if it's in the third, but I think it's sort of hinted at over and over again all the way through that his visions are not visions of the future.
Mm.
They're visions of possible futures.
Yeah.
And there are multiple visions of different possible futures, you know, and it's more of a question, and it becomes much more of a question towards the end of the book and into the second and third and so on books, like navigating towards one particular future. Like how do you do that? You know, if you know that there is this possible future out there, what do you need to do between here and there to get that one and not all of these others?
Yeah, because he wonders if he states if his mother and himself are now enemies, and if that's one of the
He doesn't
possible
wonder.
futures.
He
And-
flat out says she is
he
my
says that.
enemy.
And actually, that's the first line in this section. Now Harkonnen
Yeah.
shall kill Harkonnen, because he's realized
Yeah.
in the previous section that they're both
that
Harkonnens
she's
now. And
she's the daughter of
The Baron.
Baron.
and that's
Harkonnen.
that's
Yeah.
really got to mess with your head, knowing that you're
Yeah.
feeling that your mother is your enemy at this point. You know, just because of these visions in part. You know, and
Well, and also like my grandfather killed my father.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the
Could be an
realization.
issue.
It's just sad.
Yeah.
that's an issue. Yeah.
Is I am not, in a way, I'm not really Atreides. You know, I'm Harkonnen, and my grandfather just murdered my father, basically.
Yeah, I mean, his idea of his family and his family traditions gets very severely shaken up. No? And I mean, he is quite distressed when we leave him in part one, at the end of part one, no? When he is in this tent and experiences all those visions and doesn't really know what to do with them. No? So, yeah.
Yeah, I love the descriptions of the fluidity of time. He says in this area of time, he's blind to what's happening, but he knows where this might lead and what the possibilities are. He even invokes the Heisenberg uncertainty principle to say that some like what he sees will change what happens, or something to that effect. I thought that was brilliant. And then there's also an epigraph, right? That Irulan says I think she's wondering whether prophets choose, they have blind spots, and so they choose things that make specific futures happen, even though they're telling themselves otherwise. I think that's the right interpretation. I don't remember exactly, but she had something really interesting to say about prophets and how they choose possible futures. That was. I just loved all the descriptions of time and how they fan out and how you choose, and I don't know, overall I feel like Paul isn't really trying too hard to make things not happen, but then there is one justification to say that if it's not through him, that future will continue through his mother and sister too. So yeah, maybe because he tries changing his name to Paul Muad'Dib instead of just Muad'Dib, and that he still has visions of that distant future.
All roads lead to jihad.
Yeah.
Apparently.
He's quite reluctant though, right? That he doesn't want to embrace that path. But you know, I think it's also worth acknowledging that he's continuing to take steps towards it, right? He's very conflicted, but he's not necessarily doing everything in his power to prevent it either. It's kind of an
and kind of like the whole time I kind of didn't really believe him that he's really worried about ending up in the jihad future, because he's not only not really taking active steps to avoid it, he's kind of more taking active steps to lay the foundation for it.
Yeah.
You know, like he's not trying at all to avoid it. He's putting himself out there in front of the Fremen as a prophet, as a religious leader, and he's soaking up all of the religious craziness that they're throwing at him, you know.
The thing you got to remember is he's still only 16, 15 years old or whatever it is. And so that stuff's kind of getting pushed on him by his mother and by the people who see what he does, because every time he does something, they look at him like, oh, the Al-Gib or whatever that word is.
Yeah,
yeah, that's it. And so he's getting all that stuff pushed at him too, as you know, as well as.
And I mean, certainly at the beginning of this section, it's all kind of necessary, or at least it seems necessary for survival. Like the Fremen aren't just going to take them in,
right?
You know, the Fremen aren't exactly the friendliest of hosts, and like they need an anchor in Fremen culture, otherwise they're kind of screwed.
I mean, it's an interesting dilemma, right? That kind of what's necessary to survive and also to achieve the goals he wants, I think, very naturally, you know, to avenge his father and all the people he loves who died, you know, Duncan, Idaho, everyone who's died fighting the Harkonnens. I mean, as far as he's concerned, it's just him and his mom, right? At this point. And knowing that, you know, he feels this duty that has been instilled in him throughout his entire life, you know, to serve as the Duke, the next Duke. You know, this is the path forward that he sees, but at the same time, it's laying another path towards jihad, which he maybe doesn't want. He doesn't want to be responsible for billions upon billions of people dying, but he's not necessarily avoiding it either. He's actively, like you said, Matt, taking steps towards it happening.
Yeah.
The mother, Jessica, she thinks to herself that she needs people like the Fremen who are these trained warriors. They can defeat Sardaukar, for God's sake. And she wants to channel them. She says she could use their fanaticism to secure Paul's place in the world. And I think, I don't know if I noticed this the first time around, but she's just as responsible for whatever might come, maybe even more so than Paul.
Well, that's why he says she's my enemy. You know, he's like, she trained me. She has started the jihad, or set the wheels in motion for it, at least. You know, that's why she's his enemy.
And not just trained him against the explicit order to get or to conceive a daughter.
To have a daughter,
she brings a son into the world. No, I
think
so.
Oh, I was just going to say their dynamic, Paul and Jessica, is for me the most interesting relationship in this whole book, because of how it changes, because of how emotionally complex it is. You know, there's a lot of talk. I feel like if you run in like kind of Dune circles on the internet and in life in general, that of how cold the story is. A lot of people perceive it as very cold, and I've always felt that Paul and Jessica's story is really kind of the core. And certainly there's things with Chani too, and all of that, but just how, you know, difficult and challenging Paul and Jessica, after circling back to the fight with Jameis, that after he kills Jameis, she like confronts him about it, like willfully challenges him, and he says, "So how does it feel?"
Pulls him down,
right. Like she is trying to forge him into something, into a weapon, really. But at the same time, I think, you know, Paul has to accept his own agency, right? Like he views the jihad as like being something created by his mother, right? And he views his mother as his enemy, but like, you know, he's sort of willfully denying his own role in it, right? He's trying to pretend like, oh, it's not my problem, you know, like I intend only good things, right? You know, I'm not to blame. It's my mother's fault. And, you know, we'll see where that leads him.
Meanwhile, I'll ask to be called Muad'dib because that's what they call me in the vision.
Right.
Yeah. No, Magus actually says he names himself after a mouse, maybe to humble himself a little, albeit a mouse who's the North Star. And of course, the mouse is a survival expert. No? The mouse is king in this desert, no, where it's very harsh conditions, because can go with very little water and make do. I think as well that the relationship he has with his mother is quite interesting, because Jessica, I think she really, really loves Paul, no, like there is a lot of motherly love there, and I think she is ambitious for Paul out of this motherly love. but she's also a Bene Gesserit, and that also means she's very manipulative as well. No, so we have that aspect. So
Yeah, I think also all of that is true, and at the same time, they're trying to survive, and she
Yeah.
realizes that survival means becoming stronger, tougher, killing parts of yourself that are more gentle, in order to become part. And that's why I feel like the vision that Paul has of Jamis isn't inaccurate in some way, because it is through Jamis that he it's like a rite of passage, in a sense, is what that is. It's a rite of passage where he has to kill a person. He is hardening himself. He's becoming a man, so to speak. He is learning this culture that he is now going to be part of. And it is through Jamis that he begins this whole process of becoming part of the Fremen. So in that sense, he is his companion. He is his helper. He is his mentor in that sense. So yeah, they have to survive. And I think that's probably foremost among the motives at the moment. And then I think all this other stuff, prophecy and everything, gets wrapped into it, and it takes on a momentum, which is undeniable, perhaps you could say. But yeah.
Although I would say quickly there that Jessica's reaction to Paul killing Jamis
Right.
is to remind Paul basically of his humanity.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's how I interpreted it.
He needs that too. We need both.
She says to herself that he needs to not learn to enjoy this.
Yes.
He needs to learn to not want to do this. You know, that killing people is necessary sometimes, but it's not something you should like doing. You know, and she pulls him down really hard to make him take a look at himself. Like, are you feeling like the big man because you killed somebody? Think about that. You know, and you know, it has the desired effect in a way. You know, it brings him back to maybe a more compassionate stance and maybe slightly less ego and whatever. But so yeah, I mean, in that, I think she's also very much the loving mother, like trying to steer him to be a good person. You know, not only
the way she does it though, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's very Bene Gesserit. Like it's
Oh,
not,
yeah.
it's not kind. Like she's not showing him compassion.
Yeah. She's still the manipulative witch.
Yeah.
Tough love.
She's a Bene Gesserit all the way down, but you know, at least the motivation for
Definitely.
it was.
You didn't have a South Asian mother, Matt, I don't think, right?
No, I didn't.
It's called tough love, right, Varsha?
Tough love.
That's an interesting comment, because I was thinking as well about Jessica. She is a tiger mom. That's what she is. No? She's really pushed. No? Yeah.
And I mean, she's also like, just if you think about, like when I was reading the first section, I really stopped. It occurred to me just to think about how messed up the society is that Paul is growing up in.
Yeah.
Like even before everything pops off and the Harkonnens kill everybody, like it's already a society where everyone assumes that everyone is going to poison them.
Yeah.
You know, like betrayal and intrigue and assassination
And look
are
at how well
codified.
trained they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at how well trained they are, because you think about it, in like Jessica, like one-upped Stilgar, no problem. And Paul the same with Jamis.
Yeah.
And these Fremen were in the second part of this section, they were bragging about how they took out the Sardaukar. You know,
they were joking about Sardaukar finally being a challenge.
Right. Yeah,
but only a bit of a challenge.
And they were like, we only captured 3 of them. That was a disappointment. You know, and
we killed all of them. No problem.
Right. But they were mad that they had to kill them. They wanted to
3.
capture them all. Yeah. And they only got 3. So that was like,
and
how
then
well
Jessica
trained,
and Paul make those guys look like
so
fools.
how well trained do they got to be in order to take out Fremen like that? So you're right that it's kind of interesting how Herbert shows us the difficulty of the how difficult this world is, and how what's the word I'm looking for? You know,
Harsh and deadly.
harsh. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And deadly the world is. Yeah, the
Yeah.
universe.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's
with Jessica, I constantly, I don't know, oscillate between admiration, because she is really badass at times. No, we
Oh,
have
yeah.
this in part 1 where she confronts Harvard, no, and basically tells him, "I can take you out with just a word. No, I don't even have to move. I just utter one word, and you're down on the floor." No, so let's have that clear. So there is this, on one hand, really admiration. I think, wow. And on the other hand, I really feel sometimes very sorry for her, because she is this concubine that has just been, now it's an arranged marriage, basically. I mean, obviously she seems to love Leto Atreides to a certain extent, but basically it's an arranged marriage she's in. She's very lonely, because everybody immediately kind of like refers to her as the Bene Gesserit witch. No, they don't really want her there. So yeah, as I say, it's this mixture between admiration on one level, and then also like this, pity, compassion for her, because she, it's an almost impossible role which she has been pushed into, in a way.
It's a
and
cautious.
the book
cautious
comes back to
admiration.
that.
Yeah.
The book comes back to that over and over again from different perspectives. The fact that Leto didn't marry her,
Yeah,
that she could have been the Duchess, that she could have been some sort of official power, and that never happened. And there's explanations why, and you can kind of understand. Leto was, like, they say that Leto himself, I think at some point earlier, said he did that to always keep the possibility open that
That's a
other
power
houses
game.
would think that they could marry into his family,
Politics.
but
Yeah.
And then
never
sorry.
would.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then she thinks to herself that Chani shouldn't be married to Paul, that he can take her as concubine at best.
Right.
I did not like that, but what I liked about that scene is the immediate bit of introspection she had, that she's so eager to fall into this thought process of maybe, he said, have I been, she thinks to herself, have I been so conditioned by him? I think she means the Duke, but that she's falling so easily into that thought process of like putting someone in the same position that she did not like being in. She might even follow through on that. I don't think she concluded that this is wrong, I shouldn't continue with this. She just had this moment of introspection, and then that bit was interesting too.
She totally kind of continues with it. Like, she doesn't change her behavior, but she has this moment where she's like, wow, I think just like everybody thought about me,
Yeah. So maybe she feels better about her place, not enough to change it for the next generation per se. Yeah. So another scene that really stood out to me was, like, speaking of Jameis being Paul's friend, the funeral scene with Jameis. I thought that was so brilliant because it did so many things. It showed us the Fremen culture. The stage set for it was when Jessica thinks to herself that what the meeting between ignorance and knowledge, between brutality and culture, it begins in the dignity with which we treat our dead. And so, like, we go on to see this funeral proceeding where each person declares themselves a friend of Jameis, and then they take an object of his thing. Like, showed us the Fremen culture. It showed us that, I mean, Jameis at this point, I think we kind of really, at least I really started to dislike him for how antagonistic he was being. But then we saw that everybody was calling him a friend and talking about a time when he really came through for them. So, like, that different perspective on who he was. And then when Paul cries because he's sad about having killed his first person, they all get really they all feel amazed that
He's
he's
giving water to
giving
the
moisture
dead.
water to the dead. And I think Jessica again has a moment where she thinks, like, that drove home for her the how important water is on this land, like nothing else before that did. So I thought that scene was, like, brilliantly done. It gave us so much information and it was really moving overall.
And then immediately Chani comes back to him, not immediately, but shortly thereafter, Chani comes back to him with an extremely exact measurement of how much water they got out of Jemis's body.
Mhm.
And that's also like super brutal. I don't, I was trying to not even imagine exactly what they did to him to get it out. But and then they've got this super exact measurement. And also, I mean, I love the Fremen culture, and I love that like this section is largely about exploring the Fremen culture. And I love also that they have not only they have these super exact measurements for water, but first of all, they keep the water communally. Like nobody has their own water supply, but you carry around, usually visibly, these rings, which are a measurement of wealth, which also reflects, I mean, there are cultures that do that where, they wear all sorts of, I believe like in India, the marriage traditions with women wear these saris with little gold coins around the outside. That's like the dowry traditionally, that's where it sort of comes from. And it's a similar thing where everybody's walking around and he meets someone else. I think it's Jemis's wife also has like a scarf tied in her hair and it has all these rings on it. So everybody's walking around basically going,
look how much water I have.
Look at all the water I got. I'm a big man or a big woman because I got lots of water, It's a super interesting culture. Love it.
Yeah, Big L says, I love how this book deals with cultures and their otherworldly aspects. And I have to say as well, this is really one of the highlights for me of the book, how cultures and cultural encounters are depicted and described. And like Varsha said, the funeral scene is one of them where we kind of like really see this, where we are, where we have the newcomers, so to say, to the group, and then their reactions to this, to the rights of the freemen. So it's
the Fremen are human, technically, but they're the aliens of this book. This is a first contact situation. It's because they are so alien to anything that Paul and Jessica and therefore we know up to this point. Like they come from a planet where water falls from the sky and where you can go swimming. I love that he has to explain to Chani what swimming and drowning are.
And what a boat is, and
I like this comment from Magus. About feeling strange about drinking a friend. And it really does, I think, it's actually an important and insightful comment, I think, because you get this sense of this place through that. I mean, it is a kind of cannibalism in a way, but because that is what they have to do to survive, they build up a philosophy around this. They build up a philosophy of connection and oneness, and you really see this. We're going to talk about this scene, the water of life. That's where this is all leading. Is this and there's an ecological, I think, drive behind this theme as well that Herbert is putting out here, isn't there? This sense of connection and oneness and all of that. That's the big underlying thing that's going on here, where this is all headed. So I do think, though, that drinking your buddy would be, you'd have to wrap your head around that,
Although they're really clear about it as well. Like they would never eat Jemis.
No.
Because a body belongs to you. Your body belongs to you, but your water belongs to the tribe.
Your water is a different sign. Yeah.
And it's seen also as a I guess a very generous thing to thank the person, the dead person, for is they died and gave their water to the tribe.
That's an interesting attitude. Considering that we are like 70% water, then 70% of you belongs to the tribe, I guess. So.
So it's like, because water is communally owned, so the water of your body is just on loan, so to say. And when you die, you have to give it back. So,
like that's their inheritance law.
And if you murder a guy, you get his wife and children. I mean, Jemis was asking for it, like
I think it's interesting to note, what they define as murder and not like, because, we were talking earlier about like that in the wide world of like all the dukes and politics and everything, that like you're constantly afraid your neighbor is going to try to poison you. And here in the Fremen, like that's would be so alien to them. I mean, you talk about something like they have this sense of honor, and sense of family and community that is really foreign, but also very human, I think. And, the whole idea of murder, I think, would be just like bizarre to them, that, if you did it, something is just like broken in you, and that the way that Jamis died was like, to them, that's just normal, that sort of like challenge.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah, and
ritualistic killing.
Stilgar is
so-
also constantly kind of in the back of his head. It comes up a few times that he's worried about the next challenger, that somebody is going to challenge him, because that's just what they do. And
Yeah.
Right.
they need all the people they've got. He's not worried for himself, because he assumes that, anyone challenges him, he's going to kill him. But he's like, we need all the people. Like, I don't want to kill anybody, so I'd rather nobody challenge me, because we need all of these people,
Yeah.
It's also there is a real change when they get to the Siege, and when they really sort of make steps toward joining the Fremen. What you were just talking about, Carl, like there is a level of trust amongst the Fremen that is just, it's complete trust. And Paul and Jessica have no idea what's up with that. Like, that's
right.
totally alien to them. They don't get it to start with. The fact that you're just completely safe. You don't even need doors. Nobody has poison sniffers. There's just like, everybody in the tribe is to be 100% trusted. And it's the opposite of the society they come from,
All this talk about kind of the cultural differences brings me to what is one of my favorite epigraphs in the book. And I think there are a lot of really wonderful epigraphs, but this is towards the beginning of part 2. My father once told me that respect for the truth comes close to being the basis for all morality. Something cannot emerge from nothing, he said. This is profound thinking if you understand how unstable the truth can be. And this is, from Princess Irulan's discussions about Muad'dib. And I think this is really a wonderful epigraph, because when you dig into it, kind of what it's talking about is how people's different views of the truth, inform the way that they act, their moral center. And so you have, the Fremen have their own truth versus the Emperor has his own truth. Everyone has their own truth. And then that malleability of truth, of course, then naturally lends itself to the malleability of morality and just cultural values. And, really speaks to a lot of the conflict in this whole book. And I think it's also particularly an interesting epigraph, because we don't get a lot of Princess Irulan in this, but her thought process there shows, I think, a lot of intelligence, a real spark that, I don't know, it makes me as a reader very curious to encounter her in person too.
Yeah, you guys spoke a lot about the culture of the Fremen coming up, and I think I think Herbert prepares us to learn about that new culture, because we're encountering it through Paul and Jessica's coming into the culture, and so we're also coming into the culture with them. And he kind of switches the narrative a little bit from part 1, when throughout part 1 we keep learning how Arrakis is this harsh place. It's a desert. Nobody wants to live there. And then in part 2, we suddenly get this turnaround where Paul and Jessica look at the rim of the basin, and they suddenly say, what a beautiful place this is. And they start seeing beauty all around them. And like that awareness of the beauty of Arrakis really presents like a change to the reader's perception of the possibilities going forward. And I love how Herbert just turns it around on us like that and makes this place a beautiful place instead of that harsh place that was in part one, and then we're introduced to this culture that turns out to be something that they're going to be very involved in going forward.
I mean, this is also the bit of the book where we get the three really big secrets. You know, one secret is there are a hell of a lot more Fremen than anyone thought there were.
Oh yeah.
Like the Harkonnens were like, there's 30,000 of them or something. You know, there's millions of them because they can survive.
Yep.
Secondly, that the worms make the spice. Like that's a really big deal. And I forget what the third one was that I was going to say. Doesn't matter. But yeah,
we also find out that the Fremen are able to ride the worms.
Yeah.
So that's another thing we find out. And we find out about the deal that they have with the guild, that there are no satellites over the desert. So nobody can actually really know what they're doing.
Oh, the third one, that reminds me, thank you, of the third one that I was going to say, is that they're terraforming the planet.
Yeah.
Like,
and
nobody knows that because they're bribing the guild and there are no satellites. But like they're turning Arrakis green, you know, and that's like inconceivable to anybody except them, you know.
Yeah.
And then we understand suddenly why Leech Kynes was so important.
And this is where we find out Chani's his daughter, right?
Yeah. Well, we talk a little bit about the whole ecology and the ecological themes that are in there, because I think we haven't really touched on this. I mean, which is not surprising because it's so rich when it comes to the interpersonal relationships.
Well, and of course, Kynes is a key figure, I think, in that. He's a bit of a spokesperson for that theme in the novel. And obviously possesses an understanding of the Fremen and their place in the natural world that the other characters who are outside of that for culture don't have that understanding.
And he doesn't just have an understanding; he is one.
Yeah,
right. You know, he is Fremen. Like,
it takes a while, Fremen, but he lives with them.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he was born into their culture and grew up in their culture his entire life. You know, and I think it's in part 2 where we find out who his father was and how all of that worked. So he is Fremen. You know, but it's I found it super interesting that basically a terraforming ecologist is, up until they meet Paul, is basically their number one religious figure. You know, he's like their prophet. And you know, again, it sort of drives home how important this idea is to them, that they're willing. Like, I think Stilgar at one point, when they're talking about it, he says, you know, my grandchildren's grandchildren might see this, but it's still the big dream. It's what they want to do, what they want more than anything else, you know.
I think one of the things that's so interesting, going off what you're saying there, Matt and Angela, that the idea that like the ecological informs the interpersonal, you know, that all of their relationships and the way they view each other and themselves is informed by their environment. And that Arrakis, you know, there's so many quotes about how Arrakis makes, I was about to have an interesting slip. I was going to say makes people hard. Needless to say, yeah. And that the idea, you know, that the Caladan makes, you know, there's an epigraph that talks about how it's made all the Atreides soft, right? And that,
which is kind of hilarious because they don't seem very soft. I mean, they're pretty hardcore people.
Absolutely. And you know, talking about these ecological goals, you know, to terraform, and how much the Fremen pride themselves on being hard. But, you know, you think about, well, okay, cut to thousands of years in the future, and if you've changed your society, how is that going to change your society, right? Your culture. How is that going to impact things? You know, you want your great-great-grandchildren to live in a green world, but can you even imagine what that would do to them? You know, how does that change your belief patterns? You know, what I don't think that they've necessarily fully grappled with what it is they are pursuing. There's actually, that reminds me of another great epigraph that I was reminded of flipping through this book, about how progress is essentially like an illusion, or it's not that it's an illusion, but I can find it. Basically shields people from the horrors of the future. The idea that, like, you know, things are getting better, and so you don't have to think about all the terrors coming at you, right? And how, you know, the idea that, like, okay, we're terraforming the world. Well, what does that mean for who we are and what we're going to become, right?
Their dream, in a way, is I hope that my grandchildren's grandchildren are no longer Fremen.
Basically, yeah. But I mean, every
kind of weird.
Every society that lives in harsh conditions wants a better future. That's not harsh conditions. That's been a constant throughout history, you know. So
but there is a lot of exploration of, like, that is what makes the Fremen Fremen.
Right.
Yeah.
That is why they're such badasses, and why they have such tight tribes, and all of these things are because of the conditions.
And they're very
when
proud
the conditions
about it.
go away. Yeah, exactly. When the conditions go away, so do they. It's kind of unavoidable.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about identity and also balance. Then, where is the point where this identity might be lost if the way of life changes too much? I actually found the epigraph Carl was talking about. We came from Caladan, a paradise world for our form of life. There existed no need on Caladan to build a physical paradise or a paradise of the mind. We would see the actuality all around us, and the price we paid was the price men have always paid for achieving a paradise in this life. We went soft, we lost our edge. So too much paradise, too much greenery, then obviously is not ideal either. At least that's what this epigraph implies. We learned a lot about the ecology just before Keynes dies, when he has this fever dream when he's delirious, and he hears his father, and his father was the ecologist before him. And he basically kind of says, yeah, okay, Dad is lecturing me again. But one of the things
he hallucinates an expo dump.
Yeah.
which was I thought actually a kind of cool way to do it, you know, that he's hallucinating his dad lecturing. I thought that was pretty cool.
It's anyway. A wonderful way of info dumping, I would say. But one of the things that's mentioned there is that the basic source of civilization is its agriculture, and how it relates to the land and how it treats the land. That was one of the things that we get from this. And another thing, because we already mentioned religion a couple of times, is that his father had this idea that religion and law should be the same. And he says religion and law among our masses must be one and the same. An act of disobedience must be a sin and require religious penalties. And an act of disobedience, of course, is something that is wasteful or not grounded in ecological principles. So, yeah.
It's totally different subject, but I was kind of fascinated by Thufir Hawat's arc. You know, like he's the smartest person in the room, technically. And he gets it so wrong because he doesn't have the right data. Exactly. He has the wrong data and he gets it so wrong. And it's so motivating to him that he changes sides to get revenge. You know, like I was just like, dude, just open your mind up a little bit and investigate a little or something. I mean, of course, there's no way for him to get the data he needs at that time. But I was just like, oh man. so off target. So off target. Poor guy.
So this,
Sorry, go ahead.
Roshan. No, you.
Oh, I was gonna say the Tufir was interesting because it feels a little bit like Herbert foreshadowing AI training models because
Ah.
he has biased data and so he comes to biased conclusions. It's not just bad data; he also has biases that are feeding into his computation. Right? He thinks of Jessica as that Bene Gesserit witch, so obviously he does not have a good opinion of her, and he's primed to jump to conclusions about her. So yeah, like I, I like this that you feed biased information or you have biased models and you get biased outcomes, which was interesting. Like, yeah, he's human, but training AI models works somewhat similarly. And how
I
can
mean,
it
in a
also
way, there are like throughout the book with the history and the mentats and everything. There's a lot of sort of anti-computer position, like view against computers. But this is one of the points where maybe a computer would have done better, because Thufir's real problem in that situation is, like you said, it's bias, it's emotion.
Yeah.
He's emotional about Jessica. He doesn't trust her. She threatened him basically, like to try and convince him, but she threatened him earlier. And he's obviously like, I have to screw her because revenge. And he's angry.
He's less objective than he should be.
Yeah, he's not just doing computation, which is what he's meant to do. He's steering way off target because he's mad and he's emotional about the whole thing.
I think you see that with every character. Is they're all making their own sort of computations, and like you talk about Paul with the his visions of the future, and Jessica with how she thinks she needs to meld Paul to survive, and more than to survive, to thrive, right? And even to the Baron and the Emperor, who are making very long-term strategic choices, thinking, with a very incomplete set of data points. You talked about the secrets, right, of how many Fremen there are, and that's just one of many, right? That they don't know about these prophecies, right? They don't know what they're dealing with, and it may come back to bite them in that butt. So we'll see.
And also,
which is an
Paul
interesting point that is
Chani as well. You have Paul and Chani, and this is a major part of the story, is that developing relationship. To what degree is Paul in love with her? To what degree is he using her as someone who is his gateway into the culture? She's part of his visions, and et cetera, et cetera. And as suggested earlier, he might end up using her in a way similar in some respects to how his mother was used. So that's another example, I think. And it's complicated. It's ambiguous, I think. It's not like he's just totally using her, but it's part of the picture, isn't it?
Well, it also makes you wonder, like, how do you, because he first had visions of her before he ever met her. So he went in being like, oh, I'm going to fall in love with this young woman.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, and
how
here
does
she
that
is.
even, like, impact you? Like, can you even imagine being like, okay, I know, like, this is my future love, like that it shapes every interaction you're going to have with her, right? So it's, I mean, that's just getting into sort of the ideas of like prophecy and how the prophecies themselves make themselves happen. They are almost like beings with lives of their own. They act their will upon
and
the individuals caught in them.
Yeah. Is that vision what led him to pick up the balisette and sing her the love song, basically?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, would he ever, if he didn't have those visions of Chani, would he ever have, courted her, tried, or fallen for her in the first place? Would he have fallen for someone else? Like, who knows, right?
Would he have taken Jamis's wife as a wife instead of a servant?
Yeah.
In some ways, if you think about it, the fact that Paul can see these visions of future, it ought to be crippling for anyone. But instead, he's like choosing which paths to take, right? And so like he is bringing about the future that he thinks I don't know. I honestly don't know whether he's picking futures that he wants or he's trying to avoid the futures, but then he's still doing things he's thinks he's supposed to be. So that's a very interesting dynamic of like making things happen by trying to avoid them. That
Yeah.
always bothers me in stories, but I think that this is a very interesting execution of that.
I think there's also a bit where we get his thinking about that, where he's like, you know, to try and avoid all of this, I could just decide to do nothing. But doing nothing is also action. You know, it's also a choice, and it also has consequences. And I may as well just do stuff and try and do the right stuff, you know?
Yeah, because doing nothing might endear one of these other characters to do something in his name for him instead, and then that's going to lead to another future, and so it's this prophecy stuff is such a trap.
Yeah.
That's basically what the whole series is about.
And a lot of them have been planted by the Bene Gesserit thousands of years ago.
Right.
No? That's on top of another layer. And it really questions, I think, how much free will is there in this scenario, no? For Paul, who at the one hand has all the possibilities that he can see at once, but then also his mother, who is very much indebted to the Bene Gesserits and their visions, and wants them to become real as well. No? So it's very interesting on that level as well.
I think too, I mean, it's worth acknowledging, like, the prophecies that the Bene Gesserit have created are created. Like, they're strictly artificial. They're there just in case they needed to use them at some point. They needed to make use of the Fremen people. And so Paul, in a sense, is literally making himself a chosen one. Like, he is creating something out of something that was already there, I guess. Like, it's not out of nothing, to go back to that epigraph quote, but it is entirely artificial. And yet it is kind of, in a sense, you know, you wonder about like the free will, right? Where like he has these visions of what he could become. And in the way the future and the past and the present all get kind of mixed together in this interesting way, it really is rather complex. And I think it's difficult to judge, right? Because again, I mean, he's an artificial chosen one, but if you still end up being kind of this Messiah figure, doesn't matter, you know, whether it's artificial or not. If you complete all the prophecies, even if they're fake, I mean, they aren't fake then, right? If you do them, like, how do you define it?
Yeah, it's almost the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy.
Did any of you think about that though? When we find out about the Missionaria Protectiva, I was thinking, okay, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of planets out there with cultures that have bullshit religions because the Bene Gesserit went and messed with them. Like, there are all of these people out there ardently living their religions, which are made up by a bunch of women who are manipulating everything.
They're the one true God.
I was just like, man, these Bene Gesserit are hard to like.
They are, yeah. They're
like they're almost to me the real they're almost to me the real bad guys.
Yeah.
Like, even more than the Harkonnens. The Harkonnens are pretty small scale evil, you know. They're very unlikable, obviously, and they do horrible things, but they're doing it in a pretty direct way. Like, there are enemies there, we're going to go kill them. Maybe we'll torture this guy, you know, but it's all very direct. Whereas the Bene Gesserit are like manipulating everyone everywhere.
Like spiders.
Although
my God.
You could argue that, although you might get in trouble, but you could argue that real world religions develop in a similar fashion, except mostly it's men doing the manipulating in that case.
But there's also no central other organization which is creating all of the real world religions.
True.
You know, that's the thing. Like this is even one step beyond just.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm also not big fan of organized religion in the real world, not at all. I went to Catholic school, and that taught me, like, oh, okay, this stuff's messed up. But they're like in the universe, there's a level above that, and that's where the Bene Gesserit are sitting, and every religion anywhere has been messed with by them. You know.
It makes you wonder, right? Like what's, they say the end goal is sort of like peace and prosperity, but like, what does that look like to them, right? And I think without getting into any details, the Dune series as a whole, I think, is very interested in kind of, what are the steps, whether it's using governments or religious organizations or whatever, that an individual or a group of individuals can take, for the betterment of humanity. Like, is that possible? Can you manipulate things on such a broad scale, such an interpersonal scale? And like, is that actually moral? Like, can that be moral? Is there potentially, to use a term that I think later readers, but that's not a spoiler, will understand, is there like a golden path forward for humanity? And I think it's an interesting question. And the Bene Gesserit, I think, are the first you really see of kind of that line of thinking and that philosophy presenting itself.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like they're manipulating everything, but are they completely wrong, or are they? You don't know. You really don't know. And
I mean, the whole idea, right, is like the universe is like unforgiving and apathetic, and humanity's a mess, and so someone needs to like chart the course for humanity. I mean, it's very authoritarian, right?
Yeah.
And so of course it's easy to hate. Like, I think that's a good natural instinct to have.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting question, right? Where you're like, okay, I mean, we are really messy as a species. We don't act in our own best interest a lot of the time. So what does it take to sort of steer the right path? What does that right path look like?
I would really like to understand their processes and decision-making thought process because I think at the end of the day, it's one organization that's claiming or thinking that it knows what's best for all of humanity, and it wants to drive things in that direction, which,
right.
I mean, regardless of your intentions, you could be wrong. So I think just taking on that kind of power and ownership over all of humanity, that just feels wrong.
The problem is there's no consent, and there's no, so that's
right.
It's
Also,
they're not even consulting with anyone else.
No consulting, no consent.
No, no. And how far do the Bene Gesserits actually see themselves as part of humanity? Or do they believe that because of their training and being able to have this superhuman self-control, that they're somehow outside of that process? No?
It's also, even by the end of the book, it's also never clear to me, what do they actually want? Like, what's their end game? I know that their end game, like the only end game we really get, is they want to create the Kwisatz Haderach. And that to me isn't really an end game. It's like, okay, let's say you've got him. What then? What's he meant to do? What are you creating him for?
Yeah,
like
but that was a question they proposed to Paul right at the beginning when during the test of the Gom Jabbar. Are you human?
Yeah.
So what their idea of what a human is,
I think
the same as everybody else's.
I think that's the key. Exactly. Is I think it's not that they view themselves beyond humanity. It's that they view themselves as humanity, as peak humanity, and that the rest of humanity are animals. They're the wolves who get caught in a trap and gnaw off their own leg to try to get out.
Yeah, they're the fruition of humanity. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how Herbert portrays us as humans in general. No? When I was reading this, two, how shall I say, psychological theories came to mind. One is behaviorism and Skinner, which we encounter in the novel with the whole conditioning thing that crops up ever so often. And that's, of course, yeah, I mean, it's experiments to show how learning functions, but it also shows in some respects that we're to a certain extent programmable, no? That we can be programmed if we get the right reinforcement, so to say. And the other experiment that came to mind was Milgram's experiments on authority and obedience. And both of those were kind of like around the time when this novel was written. No? Skinner was a bit earlier, and the end of the 1950s. Milgram's stuff was first published 63. No? So he's, on the one hand, he's very much on the cutting edge of psychology and psychological theory there with how he depicts humans in some respects. No?
I'm interested. I just totally on a whim yesterday bought the biography that his son wrote.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
I'm really interested to read it. It's really stupid. It's like this thick, and then like I'm a designer. I opened it up and I immediately went, "This is a 400-page book that's been blown up to a 700-page book." Like the type is really big, the leading, the space between the lines is really big, the margins are really big. It's actually probably a weekend read, maybe 2 weekends, but it's like a brick. But I'm really interested because he worked for a long time as a journalist. So he was very actively researching lots and lots of different subjects, and he got very into the ecology of the dunes in California. He wrote a number of articles about that. So like it's clear where a lot of the at least ecological ideas came from. I'm interested to see what else like he got into. So maybe also those psychological experiments and things.
It's a very interesting conversation between the Count, that's a representative of the Emperor, and the Baron
Finring.
Yeah. And I love their thought process when they say the Count says mankind has only one science, and he says it's the science of discontent. And I thought that was a great line, and it's like you can get a lot of meaning out of that, especially from these two manipulators and these two players in this deadly game of politics that they're doing.
What did you think of Finring? Finring is a really interesting character to me.
Yeah.
And I mean, he seems to be there for a purpose as well. You know, he's a weird dude.
Yeah, I don't know if he was there to stir up trouble with the Baron or rein him in somewhat. It was very subtle what he was saying to the Baron and how they were trying to manipulate each other. And
with function, I meant more almost on a meta level, like a function in the text or a narrative function. Like Herbert put him in for a particular reason. You know, he seems to have a point as a character because he's so different from everybody else. He's a eunuch. He's kind of not really officially like politically powerful, like in like leading a big house that's doing big things, but he's the Emperor's best friend basically and right-hand man, you know.
I don't know if this necessarily answers the question. I mean, because I think you're right that there are thematic points, I think, to every character here. But I do know that the Empire was based on like kind of the Holy Roman Empire in a big part, and that like my understanding, I mean, Philip's the real historian here, so he can probably speak to this better than anyone, but that eunuchs were sometimes used as like these advisors because they were considered like passionless beings, right? That
more
like,
trustworthy.
they didn't have the temptations that other men were thought to have. I mean, they were almost their own like gendered category.
Yeah, often as guards, of course, as well, for women, because they were considered safe to hang around with the women. So,
well, they're certainly not going to get them pregnant.
That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Matt, you meant something outside of just the plot in terms of his importance to the text.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
I was just interested in what other
I mean,
people thought of him. I the whole time, because I am a bit of an action head. The whole time I'm thinking, okay, I want Count Fenring on one side and Paul Muad'Dib on the other side. I want to see you two fight. Like, because it's built up all the time that Count Fenring is the deadliest man alive. You know, that he is a duelist and an assassin and all this stuff. And the only thing we see him do is chat with people. You know, he never does anything dangerous, like physically.
But the tongue is mightier than the sword, don't you know?
Sure. But I don't think he's assassinating people by talking to them.
Probably not.
Maybe.
Probably not.
Is he a duelist too?
Yeah.
I'll admit I'm not. I haven't reread this in a few years, so
he's
a duelist, 'cause I
like
remember the poison, right?
When
Like
he's
that,
first
that's
introduced, it's really short sort of mention, but I think it's like it says he's meant to be one of the most deadly duelists in the world. He's never lost or something like that, you know. And then also that he's an accomplished assassin, and you know he's basically the most dangerous person in the book, at least how he's described. I mean, Paul actually is the most dangerous person in the book, but we never see him do anything like that. He's just having pointed conversations with people.
You know,
and then
I
in
think,
part 3, he makes an interesting. I mean, we don't need to get into part 3, but in part 3, he makes an interesting choice. You know.
Yeah, when you have that reputation, though, you probably don't need to take action that often.
Yeah.
If people are going to work. You know.
That's true. I do think that, you know, some things maybe are just because Herbert thinks it's cool. I mean, I don't know, you know, like some of it may just be that he's like, dude, I think this guy's like really cool, so I'm gonna like put him in here, you know. Like who do we need to be like the Emperor's representative with you know, Harkonnen? And so he was like, all right, I'm gonna make the coolest, deadliest dude in the galaxy.
I mean, one of the things I think was specifically in that scene, like the function of him is that scene may have been the first time where I realized that the Baron is actually pretty stupid. You know, like he is an animal. He's slightly above a really basic animal, but he's not really. Like he's in the first part, you think maybe he's this mastermind who's, you know, plotting the Atreides downfall, and then he talks to Fenring, and you realize Fenring is a lot smarter than him. First of all, Fenring is thinking a lot further than the Baron is, and has a lot better information. And the Baron is actually just kind of a bull, charging into things.
What do you think
know?
of him taking in Hawat? Was that a bad decision on his part, or a good plotting decision?
I thought that was really stupid. like
Well, that's what the Count seems to think, right?
what? Yeah. It's like, why would you like? How can you imagine that the Mentat, who's been working for the Atreides pretty much his whole life, is going to do anything good for you? Like, he's got to be plotting your downfall.
Even the Count's wife says, looks like the Harkonnens may have a new Baron ere long.
Yeah. It's just like, the Baron's an idiot.
No, she's a Bene Gesserit too, right? The Count's wife.
I
Do you
think so,
remember that right? Yeah.
Everybody's wife is a Bene Gesserit.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. Yeah.
Well, because that's their agenda, no? And that's Jessica at some stage, actually, when they're in the tent, says this very clearly. No? She says, we're here to serve, and she calls herself a brood mare. No? So they're just there to produce children, and preferably
Produce
female
steps along the
children
way.
to further the Bene Gesserit's genome project, so to say. No? That's what it's about, And they place them in high-ranking positions that if they're lucky, they might be able to influence policy. But that's not the primary reason why they're there. No? And the Baron, the Baron is very much, I mean, He's motivated by his creature's comforts. No, the only thing he thinks about is food, and that all the time. No.
We talked last week a little bit about how some of the characters are cardboard cutout. I feel like the Baron is sort of the definition of cardboard cutout. He's just there to make decisions that make things upsetting for the rest of our characters. It feels like, because
He's a
I mean,
cartoon fat man.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
he's so dismissive of the fact that there are so many freemen on the planet and makes all these bad decisions. Just, it feels like to make things move a certain direction and it doesn't tell us much about him as a character per se.
Yeah, he may be the single aspect of the book that has not aged well. You know, and feel free to disagree with me, anybody, but I feel like
I can think of another aspect, but I would.
Well, I mean, the most prominent for me, but yeah, there probably are others too.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. I mean, he is really, very. I don't even know how to describe that, but in the first book we have the scene now when he finally has Leto Atreides, and in the middle of all of this, he suddenly says, "I'm hungry," no, and he wants more food. Like, hello.
Yeah, he's a caricature of greed at a time when
exactly.
you could just portray greed as fat.
Greed,
I think it's definitely worth acknowledging that like this book has a lot of complexities, and I think those complexities are why it's endured. But it was serialized like a lot of other like pulps were at the time, and so it has its like pulp sci-fi elements. That's sort of what I was getting at earlier when I was like talking about Fenring being like the deadliest dude in the galaxy. Is like I think some of this stuff, like the Count, are Frank Herbert just like trying to like appeal to a readership, or like to make it sort of like a little more cool.
I'm totally behind any author who just wants to put something in because it's cool, as long as it is actually cool.
Right? Absolutely,
I'm down with that totally. Like, I have no problem with cool. Like,
but don't forget.
Yeah, but in the 60s, this might have been different and differently perceived as cool than we perceive it today. No, I mean today he is really this kind like character because his physical appearance matches his kind like whatever he's thinking or whatever he's representing. No, so he's fat and ugly and evil.
No, we were talking about Count Fenring though.
Yeah.
Oh, so
I don't think I mean, I think in a similar sense,
Fenring is cool. The Baron's not so cool.
Right. The Baron, I think, is the way he is because he's meant to be one of these like pulp. You're just supposed to hate him, bad guys, right? So it's like at the time, Frank Herbert was trying to do like, what are all the tropes? What? I mean, this is speculation, right? I don't know, but that he wanted someone who's just like despicable and like embodies this caricature. And so, that's why he's a pedophile too, because it was like, oh, what's, makes him even more evil is like, he wants to, abuse little boys. Like it was sort of just like throwing everything in there.
Yeah.
He's definitely a caricature. Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as the Count's reason for being there was also his wife, the Bene Gesserit. They were also talking about her breeding with the Count's son, Fade Rotha.
Yep.
As
the Baron's son.
Yeah. As part of the Bene Gesserit plan, and
nephew too.
So,
it's
nephew. Is it nephew?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's what it was. Yeah, and
you never meet the Baron's brother.
Yeah, he asked her about feeling guilty, and they said guilt starts as a feeling of failure. So that
they're
interesting line there.
The two of them.
Yeah,
the Count and Countess Fenring, they're like as manipulative as anybody gets.
Anybody else? Yep.
Yeah, they're even more than most people because they are in the middle of the web, or at least one of the webs. Not also the Bene Gesserit web.
Yeah.
They're pretty scary, manipulative.
Well, Al says, I'm convinced that nothing in this book was inserted to be cool or to appeal.
That's fair.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I think there are elements. I mean, I know Frank had tried to get things published for a long time, so he understood audience, but I don't know. It's impossible to say, right?
Well, I mean, he was a journalist, so he knew how to write an engaging text in some respects. No? So it's not
Absolutely.
as if he wouldn't have any idea how texts work and how to build this up. No? So, yeah.
I think there's a lot about the Fremen as well that I would say is maybe not only there because it's cool and appealing, but it is cool and appealing. And I think it's very consciously written that way by Frank. You know, like they are badass mofos. And that comes across pretty cool, you know?
I want to just quickly circle back to Fade Rotha too, because I think, you know, talking about the Bene Gesserit and talking about the Countess too, she's not really developed all that much. No. But again, it kind of shows the Bene Gesserit have their fingers in everyone's pies, like they're, you know, and the plan with Fade Rotha, right, as being sort of this other option, you know, as sort of the anti-Paul, right? Yeah. That he is literally kind of the other side of the coin for Paul, I think is an interesting dynamic there.
And I think Herbert did a very good job of setting him up because I feel like immediately you see how he could be a contender, whatever Paul is aspiring to, right? And I guess, what's his name? Baron thinks to himself that Harkonnen will sit on the throne, and we know that it's Paul, but this guy seems like a good contender when he's introduced on the page. So I think we're almost primed to think that he might be just another person like the Baron and the other Harkonnen that we meet, but it's not. He's different from all of them. And the Countess thinks to herself that this one will not grow fat, like just telling us that this person is different from all the other Harkonnens. There was one other. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
There was one other thing that I wanted to bring up. There was a difference I noticed in the fact that Leto wanted a male heir, and Jessica agrees with that. Like I don't think she's fighting it too much in her head. She agrees with that need, and she even gives him what he wants. But the Fremen, if Jessica had called out Stilgar and taken him in that duel, they would have taken her as a leader, or they would have been willing to take a female leader. At least that's what's implied. So the difference there in terms of like maybe the gender not even playing a role. They have gender roles, right? Because like, you inherit the wife and whatnot. But in terms of leadership and who can lead, they don't have this difference between male and female. They'll take the leadership of anyone who they think is competent, which I thought was an interesting difference between the two.
Yeah, not only competent, but like dangerous. That's the important competence you need to have to be a leader in the Fremen, is you need to be able to kill the leader. And we already saw, like, when Paul and Jessica first run into the Fremen, like Chani's up there ready to fight with everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just like women in the back and Jameis and Stilgar and everybody are out there with their knives out. Yeah, she was just as dangerous as they were. In fact, I mean, she got the drop on Paul. You know.
Yeah, I think that the two cultures and their differences are really very well done. No? We have the feudal culture and then the role of women in that context, no? As producing an heir and a spare, so to say. No, that's their role. Whereas in the Fremen culture, it's much more egalitarian, much more equal opportunity. You know? So.
Yep.
We should probably talk about the Water of Life.
Yeah.
Kind of important.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where it's all eating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Fremen drug orgy. But that's not really the point. That's very sort of.
I mean,
I was very conscious of, like, I've read this, I don't know, 8 or 9 times now, but I was very conscious on this reread of how he wrote that. And it's like, if you're not really paying attention, you could almost miss that it's a drug orgy. You know, it's very kind of backgrounded. But
which one, the drugs or the orgy?
Well, the drugs are pretty obvious because
Yeah.
we get a lot from the perspective of Jessica to start with, you know, and it's like, yeah, it's pretty trippy. But the orgy part is kind of like, yeah, you know, they're all getting pretty friendly with each other. You know,
Low key orgy.
Yeah, it's low key.
Low key orgy, yeah.
Yeah. But the interesting, well, I guess there's sort of 3 really interesting things about the whole bit to me. Hello, Fitz wants to be fed. One, like, what happens to Jessica? Like, she gets,
Oh yeah, that's big.
all the memories of every Bene Gesserit before her, or at least everyone that was connected to the Reverend Mother. I forget her name, who is there, the older one. And that's pretty insane. And then we also find out, like, what the Bene Gesserit have been breeding a Kwisatz Haderach for. And this whole bit, I'm also, this was still a bit for me where I was like, yeah, but why? Like, Paul then also gets all of the memories of all of the Bene Gesserit and male memories from someone. I don't know who that would have been, though, because there are no male Bene Gesserit. I don't really understand. I never really understood. He can look into male racial memory or species memory, you know.
I think it's just his ancestors. Like,
Right.
I think it's as simple as
Okay.
Yeah, I think the drug works on the females like Jessica, that they can access the female ancestry, his or memory of their ancestry.
But with the women, it's more. With the women, it's more than just that, because the Reverend Mother isn't really part of Jessica's ancestry.
No,
the
not
Reverend
in the
Mother
sense that they're
gives
related,
her
but as
memories.
their genetic ancestry. So all women and whatever
But
there is in female experience, they can access.
It seemed really different for me, because the Reverend Mother specifically gives her memories. So, and because of the drug, Jessica's able to absorb them. And the Reverend Mother has memories that have been given to her. So there was a Reverend Mother before her who gave her a bunch of memories and so on. It's like this chain. So it's not just genetic memory. It's actually being directly given to her, transferred to her from another Bene Gesserit.
That's a really interesting point that I had always sort of just taken at face value. But you're right. There's this like cross space-time sort of, like, the drug reaches across not just genetic memories, but across, all the Reverend Mothers throughout all time. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? And so it's like this like physical, like metaphysical imposition.
Yeah.
You know, it has nothing to do with her own DNA. It's like these memories being, I mean,
it's directly. There's also probably something about it being genetic, but it was very clear to me that it's a handing on. Like, the old Reverend Mother gives her memories. It's not just Jessica wakes up and suddenly can kind of access a whole bunch of memories. They're actually actively given to her by the previous Reverend Mother, who then dies. And that Reverend Mother is then in her head as a personality, kind of, with memories, and all of the others.
The spice connects everything. You know, like that everyone is connected through the spice, that can then be transferred through.
That's actually pointed out, because he talks to Chani, and Chani sees a child in her arms, and that's like she's seeing the future through the drugs, and he realizes there's a little talent and the Fremen kind of suppress it because it terrifies them, but that Paul sees that they all have a little bit of talent.
There's also a bit earlier where he comments in his head on the Fremen doing things just before someone needed it. You know, like they have this very limited sort of prescience that, you know, I think it's because someone brings him coffee without him asking for it. Something like that. And he's like, you know, they have so much spice in their lives that they all have a low level prescience going on.
Yeah.
But then it gets then it explodes in the drug orgy, where they all get this drug that Jessica has made safe, and they all get much more serious visions, you know. But then what's Paul accessing? Maybe it's just male genetic memory. It doesn't need to be handed on directly.
Maybe. He also has mentat training too, so maybe that figures into it, and who knows.
Well, he definitely is an anomaly because he becomes a male Reverend Mother, and that's not supposed to happen, no?
It is supposed to happen. It's their goal.
Yeah, but it wasn't supposed to be.
He becomes the Kwisatz Haderach. It wasn't supposed to be so soon. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
They miscalculated somewhere along the way. They didn't see Paul coming.
Yeah,
but it's what they've been breeding for. But still, I still have this big why question in my head. It's like, okay, so now you've got a Bene Gesserit with a dick who can see male genetic memory, which all of the other Bene Gesserit can't. And why did you want that?
Do you think they were hoping to be able to control said Bene Gesserit?
Oh yeah, it's clear that they want to control him. Yeah.
I think it might be like, I don't know, perfection for its own sake, or like perfection for, I don't know. I mean, that is an interesting question. Like, why are they obsessed with having the Kwisatz Haderach? I mean, they clearly think he would be a powerful tool.
I mean, it's clear in the third part anyway, without getting into any big spoilers, that they want the Kwisatz Haderach to be their tool. They think they can create that, which is pretty stupid idea, honestly, but they think they can create that person and then tell them what to do.
You couldn't even get Jessica to do what you wanted.
Exactly. Like, why would you think that the perfection of like the human mind is going to be a person who's just going to go, so what do you want me to do? You know?
The arrogance is insane, and
it's
not
crazy.
Any Gesserit, but like so many of these characters, just the sheer acts of arrogance that lead to their downfall. Like, it's
they didn't consider the science of discontent.
There you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jessica, of course, creates also another problem. No? She damages her daughter by undergoing this ritual or orgy or ceremony or whatever you want to call it. No?
Yeah.
And kind of like only basically halfway through realizes, oops, that wasn't a good idea. No? So, yeah.
Well, and I thought that was really well done because it's a real miscommunication, lack of awareness, lack of information thing, because Jessica doesn't know what it's going to do when she drinks it. Like the Bene Gesserit aren't exactly extremely forthcoming with what exactly their rituals are and what they mean. So she's getting the water of life and she has no idea what's going to happen beforehand. And then the Reverend Mother, who doesn't know that Jessica's pregnant, because Bene Gesserit just don't tell people shit, you know. So
there's no warning label on it either. Like, warning, this
exactly.
product will result in
may cause extreme acts of prescience in
before
children.
Taking this drug.
Yeah, exactly.
not to be given to pregnant women.
Exactly. Please consult your doctor.
Yeah.
The Kool-Aid, like Matt said.
Yeah, and it becomes very relevant. I mean, later.
What comes of this is one of my favorite bits of this whole everything. Yeah.
Well, I also
Love
have to
that.
assume that a lot of these questions you're raising in regard to what's the end goal, are addressed in the later books in the series.
To a
That's
degree,
what
they are.
Sort of, yeah.
think. But
I mean, I've read them and they kind of are, but kind of not so much. I mean, towards the end of this book, there is. I mean, it's not really a spoiler to say there is a very clear moment where the Bene Gesserit are like, "Yeah, but you're meant to be our tool," and Paul's like, "Yeah, forget that." Like, but
Yeah.
like, what is that person exactly meant to do?
right.
Isn't so explicit. Even in the later books. But yeah, Aliyah, I guess we're only talking about part 2. We can't really talk about Aliyah.
Yeah, no, we can't really talk about what the consequences then are in the end. No.
Yeah, but
yeah,
there are some interesting
next time-
consequences.
Next time.
Everybody's
time.
everybody's
Very
just high right now, so it's all good.
Yeah, exactly. and I thought it was also interesting. I think it's the very end of this section, like the last couple of pages. Chani says she's afraid of Paul.
But wouldn't you be? I mean, look at the guy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Huh?
There's something frightening in you. When I took you away from the others, I did it because I could feel what the others wanted. You press on people. You make us see things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess we're finishing on a high then.
Yeah, I was just about to say, is this a good ending point here where we call it quits for today at least?
It's a good thing you've got children, Philip.
Because I have a license to tell dad jokes.
I'm not allowed to tell jokes like that. I am childless, so I'm only allowed to tell good jokes.
Hey. Dad jokes build character.
I assume that's why I was invited.
Tell dad jokes.
Exactly, Philip.
To
That's
build
why
character.
I wished the invite to you. I needed somebody who can sit there with the full authority of fatherhood and tell us dad jokes. That's
Somebody has to.
And on this note, I think we will really end this here. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Thank you to everybody in the stream. And I will see you on the 9th of March, not as advertised on the 16th of March, but on the 9th of March will be the next discussion. Thank you, everybody, and have a good one. Bye.